Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right in to unpack the epic, completely crumbling foundation of the Kuru dynasty in Hastinapur. Now, we're looking at a story that operates on massive, world-altering stakes, but at its core, it's driven by deeply human, deeply flawed psychology. We are going to explore how unchecked ambition, festering insecurity, and the failure of older generations to actually heal their own wounds essentially doom the generation that comes right after them. It's a literal masterclass in the anatomy of a society's downfall. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire foundation of our deep dive today. We're starting with Sage Vyasa, who arrives with a pretty harsh reality check. He uses this incredible metaphor: if the choice of bricks is incorrect, the wall will not be straight. He is telling us that a dynasty, a kingdom, or honestly even a modern organization simply cannot stand if its very first building blocks are compromised. When the foundational elements are warped by selfishness or denial, every single thing built on top of them is absolutely destined to lean, crack, and eventually collapse. Part 1. The Crooked Brick of Fate. So, Sage Vyasa isn't just speaking in abstract philosophical terms here. He arrives to deliver some brutal truths to Queen Satyavati, the matriarch of the family. He sees this collapse coming from a mile away, and he knows it's time for the old guard to face the music. First off, he points out that the heirs of Hastinapur are fundamentally miserable. And think about it. If the heirs are unhappy, the meaning of everything the kingdom does changes completely, right? Second, he points directly at King Dhritarashtra as that very first crooked brick. But he doesn't stop there. He tells Satyavati that her own ambition was another crooked brick in this wall. Because he knows the horrors that are coming, Vyasa declares his last duty is to literally take her away to the hermitage. Her time in Hastinapur is over, and she shouldn't have to watch the inevitable destruction that she helped set in motion. This forces us to redefine a word that gets thrown around a lot in these sources: fate. Fate, as discussed by Vyasa and Queen Gandhari, does not mean simple luck or random chance. Fate is merely a mirror. It just reflects the truth of your own actions. King Dhritarashtra constantly tries to use fate as a scapegoat, to avoid taking responsibility for his terrible decisions. But Gandhari reminds him that man is completely responsible for whatever happens. Fate is just the inevitable result of the foundation you chose to lay in the first place. Moving into part 2, the blind king's ambition. Let's look a little closer at the man making those bad decisions. King Dhritarashtra's physical blindness is incredibly symbolic of his deep moral blindness. He absolutely refuses to see the reality of his destructive, unchecked ambition. And we see this in an incredible, raw confession to his wife, Gandhari, where he says, "Do not leave me alone with my ambitions. Sometimes I fear myself." That reveals a terrifying psychological burden. He is deeply insecure because he was initially passed over for the crown due to his blindness. Now that he holds power as a proxy king, he's terrified of losing it, and terrified of the dark, greedy places his own mind goes to hold on to it. He is a leader ruled entirely by his own unhealed trauma. So the crucial point is how this trauma manifests in a looming succession crisis. On one side of this rivalry, we have Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra's eldest son. Dhritarashtra has always promised him the throne. But on the other side stands Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir is actually the eldest of all the Kuru princes, and he's the son of Pandu, the originally crowned king. By all rights and traditions, Yudhishthir holds the true position of the eldest heir. But Dhritarashtra, totally blinded by his own ambition to see his direct lineage rule, absolutely refuses to peacefully resolve this undeniable fact. Gandhari sees her husband spiraling and asks him this pivotal question: "Why don't you allow this old wound to heal?" I really want you to think about that. How often do we see this today? Leaders, organizations, or even families driven to complete ruin simply because someone in power refuses to process their past grievances. Dhritarashtra's inability to heal his old wounds means he is actively bleeding all over his kingdom's future. Which brings us to part 3, Two Mothers, One Kingdom. This simmering tension we've been talking about officially boils over the moment Kunti, the widow of King Pandu, returns from the forest to the palace with her 5 sons, the Pandavas. She makes it very clear she hasn't returned to seize power, but simply to give the family back its heirs. But honestly, her mere presence throws everything into total chaos. Gandhari is caught in this agonizing internal struggle. She wants justice and knows Yudhishthir is the eldest, but she's also a mother who desperately wants to see her own son, Duryodhan, crowned. Meanwhile, Duryodhan is outright hostile. He feels his birthright is under attack, refusing to even sit near his cousins. Immediately, the Pandavas are treated not as returning family, but as dangerous outsiders threatening the status quo.
Which leads us to a massive fundamental question. When an entire generation refuses to heal its wounds, who actually pays the price? Well, the tragic answer is always the next generation. The petty jealousies, the broken promises, and the unhealed insecurities of Dhritarashtra and the elders are serving as the direct catalyst for the doom of their children. The young princes are essentially being handed a poison chalice.
That takes us to part 4, the poison of politics. You know, the wisest men in the kingdom, the Vidur and Bhishma, they can see this rot spreading, and it fills them with a profound philosophical despair as they watch the values of their ancestors completely crumble. Vidur captures this despair perfectly using a devastating gardening metaphor. He asks, when the gardener himself finds all the other buds unworthy and wants to nurture just one bud, what would be the future of that garden? The gardener is, of course, King Dhritarashtra. By showing blatant, destructive favoritism toward Duryodhana, the king is starving the rest of his kingdom. Vidur points out the tragic irony here. This favored bud is also going to die an untimely death because the entire ecosystem of the garden has been destroyed. And to heighten this incredible drama even further, Bhishma seeks comfort from his mother, and she delivers a bleak, chilling prophecy. She tells him that when societies decline, their core values are trampled. She compares the kingdom to a dying sea, stating, "To become pure, a sea has to die. First poison comes out of the sea. Son, you are born to drink that poison." She's telling Bhishma that his inescapable, tragic duty is to absorb the kingdom's toxicity just to try and hold it together. It is such a heavy, terrible burden for him to bear. Notice how the source material clearly contrasts the pure concept of duty with the corrupted version of politics that's currently rotting Hastinapur from the inside out. Politics is described as a force that constantly encroaches on the rights of others, is easily swayed by temptation, and is entirely driven by the ego. But duty, true duty means wishing for absolutely nothing for yourself, compromising with nothing, and making it your life's true aim. When a leader blows out the torch of duty to walk down the dark path of politics, they inevitably lose their way. Finally, we hit part 5, the seeds of conflict. Okay, so the tension goes from private family drama to extremely public rivalry when the princes begin their formal education under the sage Kripacharya. We see this deeply symbolic and provocative moment regarding the classroom seating arrangement. Duryodhana confidently struts in and assumes his usual prime seat of power, but Kripacharya immediately stops him, publicly declaring that the seat was left empty for a very specific reason. He then calls Yudhishthir forward and places him in that seat, officially recognizing him as the eldest Kuru prince. In one swift motion, Kripacharya publicly cements the true hierarchy and completely humiliates Duryodhana, proving that the rules of the larger world are not going to indulge Dhritarashtra's favoritism. Kripacharya then delivers a critical lecture on the extreme dangers of attachment and ego, which is a direct condemnation of the selfish behavior modeled by the king. He teaches that allurement, the pull of greed and favoritism, is the absolute ultimate enemy of a king. It makes a ruler forget that they are merely a guardian of the kingdom, not the owner of a treasure. He uses this haunting phrase, the word me becomes a dungeon without a door. When a leader is trapped in me, my son, my power, my ambition, they are locked in a prison of their own making. A true king, Kripacharya explains, must belong to everyone, just like God. Which leaves us right here. The source tells us that method, politics, education, and modesty are the 4 doors to intelligence. But if a leader is completely blinded by their own ego, trapped inside that dungeon of me, can they ever actually find the key to open those doors? The story of Hastinapur strongly suggests that when foundational leaders fail to heal their wounds and govern with true duty, the resulting collapse isn't just bad luck, it is a guaranteed, deeply tragic fate. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the foundations around you, and I'll see you next time.